My name is Michael Sudarkasa, and I'm happy to welcome you all to our session. I am the CEO of Africa Business Group and also the country coordinator for the Private Finance Advisory Network for South Africa, Lesotho, and Eswatini. And I'm very pleased to have you all join us to our program on finance at the nexus between climate change, clean energy, and agriculture. I'm pleased to have as a panel who will discuss really all of the trends and developments that are happening around the continent that are creating a convergence of the utilization of particularly renewable energy in the agricultural sector. I have Mr. Thaven Naidoo, who is the Southern Africa Regional Coordinator of PFAN. We're also joined by Ms. Kornelia Iipinge, who's the coordinator of the SADC Renewable Energy Entrepreneurship Support Facility, which is part of the SADC Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. We also hope to be joined by our third panelist, Ms. Tsitsi Musasike, who is the Origination and Client Coverage and Energy Environment and ICT Manager for the Development Bank of Southern Africa. The format of our conversation this afternoon is really meant to be informative and also to give colleagues who are joining, who are particularly involved and interested in project development, insights about what type of tools exist in this sub-region of Southern Africa, what some of the trends are, what type of programs exist, what type of funding exists to help develop projects that are, again, at this growing nexus. The challenge on the continent today is that we have increasing negative detriment to climate change. So we're having a growing number of floods on the continent. And whereas in years past, one might have a drought every 5 years, every 10 years, we're almost having a cyclical reoccurrence of drought across particularly Southern Africa, but many parts of the continent. That is driving those involved in agriculture. And agriculture, as you would know, is the backbone, if you will, of many economies on the continent, where you have 60 to 70% of jobs, particularly in rural parts of the continent, created through agriculture. And so if you're an agriculturalist and historically you have used rain-fed irrigation, if you will, to ensure that your crops had adequate water, you're now trying to see, how can I use wells? How can I electrify my wells? How can I irrigate my crops? Because now, not only is there not adequate rainfall, the times of year when it used to rain are all out of whack because of the changes that are happening because of climate change. Similarly, it's becoming more difficult just to store one's produce. So post-harvest losses are growing. And so there's a need to figure out, how can I better store my produce? How can I cool my produce so that I have some kind of cold chain to get the produce from where I've picked it to market? These are all challenges that we're having increasingly around the continent. Similarly, as the continent grows and the middle class grows, there's a growing desire for processed food. So the demand for value addition and value adding is growing exponentially. And so there are increasing numbers of enterprises that are saying it's not enough just to produce high quality produce. I need to now transform that produce. And for that, I need machinery, I need electricity. And so there's a growing demand for rural electrification. And I'd like to do this closer to the farm gate. So as this happens, there's an increasing need for different type of skills in rural areas, different type of funding discussions. It's not just about improving yield. It's about bringing technologies to these communities that heretofore haven't had access. And so today we have a group of experts and specialists who have initiatives that are in this space. And we have our colleague, Tsitsi Musasike, who's joined us, who is at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And she'll talk about trends that are happening in that space in terms of what is going on with energy finance and how, again, someone who has a particularly focus on agriculture can look to leverage and develop an energy project that supports their needs, but may also be able to support rural electrification development plans. So I'd like to start our conversation with Mr. Naidoo, and I'm asking each of our panelists to please introduce yourself, tell our audience a bit about your background and what you do, and then I'll have some specific questions for you and we'll get into our conversation. So I'd like to start with you, Thaven, and then Kornelia, and then Tsitsi.
Thanks, Michael. So my name is Thaven Naidoo, and I am the Southern Africa Coordinator for the Private Finance Advisory Network. The Private Finance Advisory Network is a finance facilitation accelerator, and I'm just going to share my screen to try and do a short introduction to PFAN. Okay, can you all see my screen?
With full screen, it might be a little easier for everyone to follow.
Thanks. So essentially, the private financing advisory network tries to look at how do we bridge this gap, because on the one hand you have a lot of projects looking for money, and on the other hand the reality is that there is a lot of money out there looking for a home, and PFAN tries to bridge that gap. And the way we do that is by providing free advisory to projects that we select to work with. So using this process to date, we have raised in excess of $1.7 billion for projects, primarily in the renewable energy fields to date. That's accounts for over 100 projects and about just over 1,000 megawatts of clean energy generation that has been added. We have a success rate of about 18%, so 1 in 5 projects just about that comes through us gets financed. At this stage, we're now a global network, and in Africa, we have a West African, an East African, and a Southern African network. And in Southern Africa, we are represented in 10 countries. So we work with projects in a range of sectors, both climate adaptation and climate mitigation. And of course, in terms of climate adaptation, agriculture is a very, very significant sector. Generally, we like to work with projects that are in the range of $1 million to $50 million, although we will work with smaller projects if they have good potential for scale-up. We work with projects just about at any stage of development, although the ideal project would be one that is going for its first round of external financing. We are completely technology agnostic, and of course, we work in least developed countries and middle income countries. When we look at a project, of course, it needs to be commercially viable and technically viable. We look very seriously at the management team. We think that that's a critical component. Increasingly, we're looking at the development and gender impact. We're looking at most projects now through this gender lens. And of course, it needs to have some climate impact and growth potential. And we work with not just project developers, but we also work with investors and with climate and clean energy stakeholders. So that's essentially what we do. And to date, we have found that, one of the key challenges is that, well, certainly this year, of course, there's been a completely different focus to activities. But generally, the climate imperative is not yet driving agriculture. So while it may strongly influence agriculture, there isn't yet the focus on climate to the extent that it is central to agriculture. When you look at investments, one of the key issues in Africa is the inability to agglomerate projects. So you would find projects that are very good, very feasible, that can provide a return on investment, but they're not yet at the scale that investors would want to look at them. We've seen a lot of projects come from the climate smart agricultural initiatives, and increasingly we're seeing interesting projects come from cold chain development. So if you look at how produce gets managed from the point of production to the point of sale, there's a whole cold chain there, the gap that needs to be filled, and there's interesting potential there. I think that increasingly, as we see this drive to net zero, we will see a lot of interesting projects coming to the fore. The whole area of carbon sequestration through soil carbon is very interesting, and there are some interesting initiatives developing around how you measure that and how you finance that. So in the same way that there was the CDM capacity to get carbon credits previously for offset projects, there's the potential to now get finance for soil carbon sequestration. I mean, I'm going to leave it there for now, and we'll pick up on any questions that come up so that the discussion can be more directed. Thank you, Michael.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to ask Kornelia, because she's managing a program that works with entrepreneurs in Southern Africa, a number of whom are involved in agriculture. But I'd like you to unpack your program and what are some of the trends that you're seeing in your work, Kornelia.
Okay, very good morning or afternoon to everyone. My name is Kornelia Iipinge. I'm the project coordinator for the SADC Renewable Energy Entrepreneurship Support Facility at SACREEE, which is the SADC Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Maybe just a brief on what SACREEE is. SACREEE was established by the SADC Ministers of Energy with the mandate to promote and increase access to modern energy services, as well as to improve energy security in the SADC region. So for the Entrepreneurship Support Facility, we had out a call last year, 2019, for SMEs within the region to apply. And we've got about 70 applicants that applied, and we are supporting 32 of those from 10 SADC countries. And they specialize in different renewable energy technologies, which include biomass, biofuel, hydropower, wind, as well as solar PV and solar thermal. And with this, we have also indicated within the application for specification in terms of productive use of energy, which really then talks about the water, energy, and food nexus. So this is really important to us, and we've considered that. So with the facility, then what we do is that it offers technical training only, but not financial. So we are enhancing and strengthening the capacities of the SMEs in terms of their business potential of sustainable energy use, as well as the the technical renewable energy technology specific trainings. As well as with that, we then also have to address the need to increase the confidence of the financial institutions in terms of renewable energy appraisals. So this is what the facility aims to do. Thank you. Michael?
You're muted.
I was asking before we shift to Tsitsi if you could just give a little background about how long the program has been running and how many more years will go. So how does one get involved? Because you already have a cohort now, but how would one get involved going forward?
Okay, so going forward, this is the first cohort, and I forgot to mention that we are supported by the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. So we aim to put out a call end of this month for the 2021 applicants to apply. So that will be shared on the SACREEE website. And in terms of the trends that you have mentioned, is really we have seen that really a lot of SMEs mostly struggle in terms of putting up bankable projects, as well as for the financial institutions. We have noticed that in the region, there's also a need to capacitate the financial institutions in appraising renewable energy technologies or projects. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for that additional information. Tsitsi, I would like to turn to you because your institution is known as one of the leading energy investors in the sub-region. And I'd like you just to talk about the trends. And you also host a number of funds, including the Green Climate Fund, et cetera. If you could share with the audience kind of some of the trends, the expanse of resource that you have and where you see it going, that would be very helpful.
Thank you very much, Michael. My name is Tsitsi Musasike, and I'm a principal deal originator at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. For those that are not familiar with the work of the DBSA, we are a development finance institution. We held 100% by the South African government. Our mandate is for Sub-Saharan Africa. Prior to that, our mandate was restricted to the SADC region, but now it's been extended to the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa. So in terms of sector coverage, we are an infrastructure bank and we focus on energy, transport and logistics, water, and ICT. But because we are a government-owned institution, we are a DFI, we also have a social mandate. So we also invest in education, in housing, and in health. In terms of the energy space, that's the space that I'm familiar with. I'm a principal deal originator within the energy unit of the bank. The bank has done a lot in terms of funding renewable energy, clean energy. We have been very instrumental in the development of the South African Renewable Energy IPP program. We have actually capacitated the IPP office in South Africa that runs the program. In terms of achievements to date, I could safely say that the government has to date contracted over 6,000 megawatts in renewable energy across different technologies: solar CSP, solar PV, landfill gas, biomass, hydropower. And in terms of the trend, we see a lot of growth, given where we've been as a country against the rest of the world with the pandemic. There's a lot of, renewable energy programs, projects that are coming to the market just to assist with the job creation that the government is focused on. In terms of the bank and investment in infrastructure in renewable energy specifically, we've been involved in over about 33 projects, renewable energy projects, and we've invested close to 20 billion rands in renewable energy. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
In terms of the climate fund, you said you wanted to know more about the climate funds that we manage. We are accredited to the GCF, and we run 3 GCF facilities, the main ones being a climate finance facility, which is meant for projects in Lesotho, Eswatini, South Africa, and Namibia. And we also have the Embedded Generation Investment Program, which is meant to fund projects that do not have a sovereign guarantee. Thank you.
Thank you. And I found the last point that you mentioned particularly of interest, the embedded generation projects, because most often, if you're a larger entity, you're not thinking necessarily about, and I'm saying larger in agriculture, because Southern Africa does have some commercial players, along with the smaller holder institutions who potentially could qualify, but they're not necessarily thinking about it. So I wanted to ask you about size, and I'm going to ask Thaven about this as well, in terms of, for embedded generation, do you have a minimum size, ticket size for those projects, or is it on the, is it a project finance initiative that if you can show how you'll make the return, you can get funding? If you could talk a little bit about that, Tsitsi, and then Thaven, I'd like to come to you to get a little bit more about the parameters around which PFAN takes on projects and helps the project promoters to get funding.
Thank you, Michael. It doesn't have to be a project finance transaction. It could be a corporate finance transaction. It could be an on-balance sheet finance transaction. We look at all projects that make commercial sense for the bank. Like I said, we are a DFI, Development Finance Institution. We focus on, mega projects. So the minimum that you'd really be looking at is anything from 150 million rands to, the sky is the limit, I guess. But anything from 150 million rands we'll be able to look at.
So those are much bigger projects that potentially could be aggregated, or potentially could be, one of the trends that's happening in some of the countries around the continent is the idea of developing agri-processing hubs that serve as the central point for value addition, cold chain development, storage for smaller farmers around. And so they might be interested in that type of facility. Thaven, on the other side, talk about the sweet spot, if you will, for PFAN and what the process is for a project developer to come to you. And I know that you said that there's increasing focus on adaptation initiatives, but you were saying that the market hadn't necessarily caught up, that you didn't see a lot of people knocking down the door with these projects. Just explain that for me, and explain again what ticket size would PFAN look at, and then the PFAN process. Does PFAN itself have capital, or does PFAN facilitate the development of projects to get capital?
So I think the challenge is that for projects in the agricultural sector, which fall under climate adaptation, for investors, they look at these in the same way that they would look at any other investment. The fact that the project has particular climate credentials doesn't give it any benefit as such. So these projects remain very risky. And, I think if you look at the new State of Blended Finance report, you will see that actually there's a lot of potential for agriculture. So there's a lot more work that's going to need to be done in this sector. In terms of working with PFAN, any project wanting to work has to apply online through our portal. And we apply the same kind of screening lens that any investor would apply, except that there's a huge advantage of working with us. Firstly, any project coming in and receiving support from PFAN receives that support free of charge. We are financed by backers to provide these services to PFAN. And then we have this huge network of investors that we can direct projects to. And as our investor network expands, we have a greater global reach than any individual project developer would have within their own country. And when a project gets to an investor that has come through the PFAN pipeline development process, it's almost as if it has some kind of stamp of approval. So the chances of you getting in the door are a little bit higher than if you would otherwise. There was one more question that you had, Michael.
Well, it was just about ticket size as well. So, I mean, I wanted to just clarify that PFAN is really a no cost to the project developer, corporate finance supporter in terms of helping you package that project and take it to interested investors, because PFAN has this network of investors, so that at least the process can be a bit more efficient. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So, generally we say that our ticket size is between $1 million to $50 million. We have worked with projects bigger than that, but the reality is that the real sweet spot for investors is between $5 to $10 million. We very often find that out of Africa, we're getting a lot of projects coming in that are at smaller scale. And the challenge there is about agglomerating projects. How do we get a series of projects together to get to scale? Or if, for example, you look at climate smart agriculture, the introduction of a new seed, do we support the farmer wanting to purchase that seed? Or is there an opportunity to support some agglomerator, either in terms of somebody who's selling inputs, somebody who's providing finance to farmers, or is the agglomeration point in terms of the person who's milling the additional volume of produce that comes out? So we always have to be looking for that agglomeration point in order to get to scale.
Excellent. And you mentioned that PFAN has representatives around the continent. If I'm outside of Southern Africa, what is the way that I identify the PFAN representative in my country?
So project developers can apply from anywhere. We vet each application to see that it fits into one of our territorial areas of operation. And it's pfan.net, the website, with all of the application details on there. So even if we don't have representation in a country, we can still take that project in. Invariably, the project at some point will interact with the country representative, but really we accept projects from anywhere within our global sphere of operation, which is middle income and least developed countries.
Excellent. And Tsitsi, I just want to come back to you as well on the how does one engage the bank if one is outside of South Africa or Southern Africa, because you mentioned that your remit is now continental.
Yeah.
How do project developers that may not be very close, may not be that familiar, how do they get in touch with the bank?
They can visit www.dbsa.org. Alternatively, they can send me an email at ccm@dbsa.org. Happy to share my details, with the audience.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And Kornelia, I want to turn to you because you're doing, and your program is doing one of, I think, the key things that lead to investment readiness, which is developing and helping entrepreneurs package their projects. Do you see interesting collaboration? Both Tsitsi and Thaven have talked about the need for scale. And very often, though, an entrepreneur can't see that far out to say, how big do I need to be, etc. What's the the input, if you will, that your program gives to entrepreneurs? And when they leave your program, where are they in your thinking? Are they now ready for debt capital, for equity capital? Do they need grants in some instances? Walk us through that process.
Okay, so with the process, we really aim to prepare and capacitate the SMEs. So the one thing is the understanding that they are small and medium, but then already sharing information that if then they become a large, they operate at a larger scale than what would be required. Things like the power purchase agreement, those are maybe for small enterprises, they might not consider that, or that might not be in thought, but as they then scale up, what they would need to require. And really, as in the process, we are also trying to make sure that they work through the project or proposal that they applied with, to make sure that they keep on updating, and what they then learn, to make sure that they keep that and already try and implement it. Because the challenge that we also get is that then if it's just spoken, sometimes not putting in practice doesn't happen. And we really see, and with the interactions that we also aim to do with the financial institutions, that hopefully then we can also link this to different stakeholders together and see then how they could better communicate. Because the one thing that is also there is that the financial institutions don't understand the technical language, so and also just need to be capacitated in that area. So we are hoping that with then, even with DBSA that is leading in the region, that could also be one of the financial institutions that can offer services or try and train upcoming or other existing financial institutions within the region. So that's really what we aim to do.
No, excellent. Well, I think I want to pick up on one of the points that you mentioned with Thaven, which is that you're finding that there are financial institutions that do not seem equipped yet from a exposure or skills development to make investments in the energy space. Thaven is saying, though, that there's a community of investors and financiers that PFAN is aware of, though, that have some of those skills. And Thaven, you're responsible for Southern Africa. What do you see, and what's your take on the level of preparedness of our financial institutions, and I'd particularly say outside of South Africa, but perhaps even in South Africa, to play a role in funding projects that are at the nexus that we're talking about this afternoon?
So I think the reality in South Africa, we have a slightly different situation to the rest of Southern Africa. Certainly, our REAP program has had a huge impact in terms of building capacity and awareness of the potential of renewable energy. I think in the context of this discussion, the question is either around energy for agriculture or agriculture itself. And I think for the large part, both energy for agriculture and agriculture itself are regarded as reasonably risky investments because of the potential impact of climate. And if you look, for example, at Mozambique, where there's a huge program, agricultural program on the go at the moment, Mozambique remains a very risky area to invest in because of the potential of events. And there's opportunities in other countries across Southern Africa. In Namibia, there's a big drive now for these smaller distributed generation capacity units, and that's getting a lot of traction. And of course, one of the big beneficiaries of that will be agriculture, because there is huge agricultural potential in Namibia. You know, if you look at Zambia, you have great potential there, but you have some infrastructure problems. So I think we're compounded by a multitude of challenges, and to some extent, you need a very broad sweep of development to get moving. In particular cases, you will find that there is an investment that is extremely attractive because it has achieved the scale in order to resolve a lot of the subsidiary problems on its own. And I think that generally there is in the region, while there may be some issues around the kind of knowledge and technical speciality required for some investments, I think in the region there is generally a reasonably good knowledge base. And I think that there is the potential to support projects if projects themselves can deal with the project risks associated with the particular sector or particular kind of project. On mute.
I'm now switching to Tsitsi to have her talk a little bit about DBSA's role in supporting what seems to be, at least in the South African context, the emergence of municipalities being able to contract with independent power producers. And I'm saying that because potentially outside of South Africa, even, it may be a way to get electricity to at least smaller municipalities that don't have. I mean, one of the challenges in the whole region is the expanse of the grid. But if you can contract directly with an IPP who's going to develop a mini grid for you, et cetera, you expand the reach of energy access for a particular city. Is DBSA playing a role in that space, planning to play a role in that space? Could you speak about that?
Yeah, you're definitely right. We are currently involved with most municipalities have expressed an interest, in generating their own power so that they're independent from ESCOM. So we currently have about 16 municipalities that have approached the DBSA in terms of funding for, self-generation. But always with these types of programs and with municipalities, procurement is a big issue. So if an IPP approaches us, they need to have been properly procured by the municipality. So it's a space that we definitely, looking at.
And do you see the potential for that to expand elsewhere in the region, or is that a uniquely, at this juncture, South African development? And I guess I would ask you to share a little bit about your thoughts about kind of policy development for that, so that you can have less than just the state procuring power in other parts of Southern Africa beyond just South Africa.
Yeah. So I think Kornelia spoke to the PPA earlier on. As long as the PPA is bankable, as long as whoever is procuring the power from the DBSA is bankable, we will definitely look at that opportunity. So as I mentioned earlier on, we're DFI. Yes, we have social mandate, but at the same time, we have to be commercially sustainable. So any project that makes commercial sense for the DBSA, we'll definitely look at it, whether it's South Africa or it's the rest of the region. We'll definitely look at.
And from a project development standpoint, and we have PFAN as an institution that plays that role. Could you mention any other assistance that project developers might look to, initially in the South African context, but potentially in other regions, in other parts of the region? Because project development is often quite expensive and for developers, and that's where a number of them struggle. Are there any support for that you can recommend?
Yes, we also have at the DBSA project development, project preparation fund that assists developers, to take their projects from pre-feasibility to bankable feasibility. So you need to have done the pre-feasibility or the scoping study before you can approach the DBSA for development funding. That fund is normally applied on a 50-50 basis, so you'd fund 50% of the cost. And it's normally used to pay third-party service providers for your project, and not necessarily to reimburse you for the cost that you would have incurred up until that stage. Obviously, you can recover to the extent that the project gets to financial close. You can recover, whatever investment you would have put into the project development. And at the same time, the DBSA also recovers, their investment in the development work at financial close.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thaven, in your remarks, you spoke often about investors, and I just wanted to clarify if within the PFAN context, there is access to grants, debt, and equity, just so that those listening in would know what type of capital PFAN works to mobilize. And I guess for the areas that you don't focus on, do you provide any assistance in helping guide project developers to that type of capital if they need it?
So from a PFAN perspective, we definitely don't work with grants. Although we see that there is a huge need for it, we do have partners that can support some projects, but of course that's not based on any PFAN recommendation. They evaluate projects on their own, based on their own criteria. In terms of whether it is debt or equity, the process of being supported by a PFAN advisor helps resolve exactly how that project should be structured in terms of the financial ask. And we have people in the network that provide both debt and equity to projects without any doubt.
No, thank you. And I just have a follow-on for you, which is kind of pushing a little bit for those listening in terms of the types of projects that you think are potentially most scalable or lend themselves best to aggregation. Some of the projects that have been leading in this nexus area are irrigation programs, for example, so that the water pumping is done with solar PV. And you mentioned a bit about the cold chain, but are there other areas that you would see potentially more appropriate or that financiers will find more attractive in financing projects in this nexus at this juncture?
So I think that there are a lot of interesting new sectors that are coming up. If you look at ag tech, for example, there are a lot of projects that have great potential in terms of mobile platforms for dispersing money, mobile platforms as for extension services. If you look at the whole sector of what you can do with drones, there's a lot of very interesting projects there. We've seen projects from West Africa. There's a project from a company from South Africa using drones that allow precision application of both pesticides as well as nutrients and water. So there's a lot of very interesting things that you can do there. Certainly in terms of drip irrigation, there's a lot that is going on. But again, there's the problem of aggregation. Are you providing support to the microfinance facility that is then on providing their finance for the purchase of these these drip irrigation systems, or are you providing the finance to the company that is selling the drip irrigation? it's not really possible for PFAN to get involved at the point of the individual farmer who wants to sell these systems, wants to buy the system. I think there's a lot of potential in controlled environment agriculture. Likewise, with vertical agriculture, there's a lot that's happening. Of course, these systems still have to prove themselves to reduce the risk, even though they have proven themselves in other operating environments. I think the whole area of alternative proteins is very interesting. And out of South Africa, we've had the company out of Stellenbosch, I think it's Ag Protein, that has done very well. They initially started off with centralized systems, and it looks like now they are looking at more distributed systems. So they would be the aggregator with a lot of smaller producers supplying them. So there's a lot of potential in different kinds of sectors, but I think the issue of risk and reducing the risk to show traction, and I think really what you need is to be able to show exits. You need to see financiers exiting projects for there to be enough surety that it is worthwhile getting into these sectors.
No, I think that's helpful. And in process heat, we've talked a lot about the electricity, but another key need in the food sector is for process heat, or the beverage sector. Is that a space of interest as well?
I think there's a lot that's possible there. I think that there's certainly, from a South African perspective, there's the issue of local manufacture that needs to be considered, with some interest being shown now from international players to establish facilities in South Africa. And certainly, if you look at food production and beverage production, there's a lot that can be done with localized manufacture of hardware. I think really the issue is, who is the off-taker? Who is the company that is going to be applying this technology? And you have to be sure that they have either the capacity for off-balance sheet financing, or they have the capacity to raise project finance based on subsequent offtake agreements that they have in place that are secure.
Tsitsi, I wanted to ask you for any finance on the call and listening to us about any guarantee programs that DBSA has for financial institutions. I know some of the DFIs, the more continental ones, World Bank and ADB, often on lend through financial institutions. Does DBSA do that, or it's directly project related exclusively?
It's most of it is direct project finance lending, although we've done one or two loans to other on the African continent, but it's mostly project finance or corporate finance funding. We are currently working together with GCF. We have been looking at a public sector energy efficiency program that would come with a guarantee to unlock, the commercial banks to participate in the energy efficiency space. So watch this space.
Yeah, no, it's. I think to me the GCF relationship is a very pregnant one in terms of as GCF itself tries to do more with the private sector through intermediaries that are there. There'll be many more people kind of knocking at the door to see how to work with the bank, particularly in the sub-region. So I think you're right about watching the space.
Yeah, thank you.
Kornelia, I want to come back to you because you're working with the small and medium-sized enterprise, and in many parts of Africa in the agricultural space, that is the predominant player, if you will. It's not necessarily the large corporate entity, but I wanted to ask you about linkages that can be created in your program such that, for example, in the agricultural space, a commercial player can have an offtake contract or other supplier development relationship with some of your SMEs so that they have a steady market for what they're doing. They potentially can get technical assistance from this larger partner, but they become part of the value chain. Because to me, one of the ways in which one can kind of bring financing down to smaller and medium-sized players is through value chain finance and value chain linkages, and also help those smaller players kind of upskill the technologies that they're exposed to. Again, I'm not sure if your program is working in this space, but I'd love for your thoughts on this if you are.
Yes, our program is not directly involved in that, but I think the aim goal that then each and every entrepreneur, in terms of their goals or who really they target, some of them are within productive use of energy, and the other thing is that it's at times not directly that they know that they're in that sector, but their customers or their clients, I mean, they are the ones that are on the ground, and then if they provide solar for pumping water, that's then the client, as an example, in rural communities that directly benefit. So in those cases, I think one of the other thing is the engagement or communication, engaging and speaking to one another. And also this is also one from my end, not from coming from a background which is not financial, neither renewable energy, but there's need for communication, for awareness, and reaching out to say this is what we do and how can we collaborate, or how can we communicate. I just wanted to share one example of in the youth, since maybe there might be some youth also on the platform. Within the SADC, there's a SADC innovation challenge, that innovation and investment challenge that took place. And one of the winners in the SME was from Tanzania, where their name is Pema Agri, and their product is a digital agricultural crowdfunding platform that facilitates working capital financing for smallholder farmers that specifically selected value chains. So that's also an example in terms of then either the youth or just getting innovative, trying to find solutions that could then support on-ground implementation and also to scale up. So I think that's one of the good examples. And also with the experiences from PFAN as well as DBSA, there are also other programs in the region. As an example, there's the Environment and Energy Partnership, which is EEP Africa. They are also a clean financing facility, but and also for them, they also have a component of knowledge exchange forums. So that's also one aspect, and as well as the investors forum or business development support. So those are also examples that are within the region of financing more than the small to medium enterprises.
No, I think you're spot on with the idea that we can benefit from more shared experiences in our countries and within the region. And I'd like to just share with you, perhaps you're aware of it, but the South African National Energy Development Institute, SANEDI, along with the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership, REAP, which is one of the founders of PFAN, have for the last 3 or 4 years been developing an energy in ag kind of a working group. it's been mostly at the national level, but my thought is that through a collaboration with SACREEE and your program, it could be expanded to one that is a bit more of a regional focus, because the idea there is bringing stakeholders together who have an interest in the energy ag water nexus, talking about what's working, what's not working, where policy might play a role in developing that, and also having periodically financier roundtables. So bringing funders who are interested in this space together, and they then talk about what their interests are, their appetites are, what makes a good project, and again, how project promoters might collaborate to create bigger projects. Because one theme that I'm getting out of today's discussion is around the need for aggregation as one of the hallmarks of sound bankability. As we're getting toward the end of our program, I would like to just ask each of the panelists to share a bit about their thinking about the future. And future now is in the next 24 months. We didn't talk much about COVID and its impact, and it has had one. But where do you see this space evolving, or the space that you work in evolving over the next 18 to 24 months? And I'll start with Tsitsi, Thaven, and then I'll go back to Kornelia.
Thank you very much, Michael. Within the next 24 months, the South African government has put out a tender for the risk mitigation IPP program. We're expecting 2,000 megawatts of power across all technologies. It's not technology agnostic, it's technology agnostic. We're also looking at, within the next 24 months, the next round of renewable energy projects under the Renewable Energy IPP program in South Africa. So interesting times, the next 24 months. Yeah, thank you.
Thaven, on your side?
So I think the COVID challenge has certainly changed our perspective a lot. We've shown how fragile our food systems and supply chains are. And I think there's now a growing acknowledgement of the potential of agriculture in Africa. There's certainly a need for there to be more innovative financial instruments. And again, I'd refer to that State of Blended Finance report, which was released today. There's some very interesting findings in that with regard to the potential for agriculture. So over the next 24 months, I see that there's going to be a lot more money available for agriculture, a lot more money available for climate. I think that it is a huge opportunity for businesses in Africa, in energy, in agriculture, and in climate more generally, to be able to access funding and to really drive project development substantially.
Excellent. And Kornelia, your world in the next 24 months, and how your stakeholders have navigated COVID, what's your take?
Yes, I think the one thing is that really COVID has helped us in some way really to navigate through the virtual platform. So I think this is really that within the next 24 or 12 months, really, that everyone else has really mastered how to navigate through this. And even with businesses such as the small SMEs, they were not regarded as essential services. But I think with governments, they've really realized that the society or the social aspects are affected, and that should be really considered in trying to make sure that climate change adaptation measures are put in place, or putting up renewable energy technologies, or even agriculture, as mentioned, that food was really essential to make sure that food gets to the people, you know, so that is very important. And then another thing is even in terms of such platforms as the Investment Food Forum, opportunities then were created to have platforms open to everyone, or events or webinars. So this is also platforms that information is shared, and we get to know each other, we get to know what is happening at certain organizations. So that's really, I think, within the 12 months that things are really working for a positive in that aspect. Thank you.
No, excellent. And I do agree with you that the digital revolution that has been forced on everyone globally really portends to help expand access to information, because these skills that everyone has adopted will stay with them, and the new normal will include being able to use platforms like this. So I'd like to again thank all of my speakers, Kornelia, Iipinge, Tsitsi, Musasike, and Thaven, Naidoo, for your rich contributions to this discussion. And to use Tsitsi's point, watch this space, because increasingly in the next 24 months, I do believe that there'll be increasing convergence of those who are working in the energy and water and in the agricultural space. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank
Thank you.
you.